Well, today's message is actually inspired by these graduating kids. Now, I don't know if you remember what it's like to be 18 and graduating from high school, but you got to make a lot of choices. Like, where do I go to college? What do I major in? Who do I date? Who do I marry? Like, these are huge choices that can feel like life or death. And we can get stuck in this deal of, what's my purpose in life? How do I know what my purpose is in life? And if I know what it is, if I feel like I know 100% what my purpose is, well, how do I go about doing that? How do I achieve that purpose? And how do I know that I'm living what God has for me? And so to look at this and explore this, we're going to look at the life of King David, who, we get more written about King David in the Bible than any other person except for Jesus. And not only do we have all the narratives about David's life, from his life as a young boy to his death as an old king, we get all of that, but we also get his internal dialogue, his poetry, where his heart was, what he felt like during his greatest victories, his most humbling defeats. We have all of that in the Psalms. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at David, because David is described by God as a man after his own heart. And what that means to me, and what you'll see here, is I think there's one aspect of David's character that defines him more than anything else. It's not that he's an awesome warrior. It's not that he's an awesome musician. It's not that he loves the law and the Bible. It's not any of those things. It's something deep internal about David that he understands that most of us don't. And it almost never gets talked about. And so to set the stage for David, we got to go back before David about 20 years to Samuel. It says, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. But his sons did not follow his ways. Samuel was an excellent person, excellent character in the Bible, the prophet of the Lord, dedicated since birth to the Lord. His son somehow did not get those traits. As often happens, your character does not necessarily dictate what your kid's character is going to be like. But they turned aside after dishonest gain, and they accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the leaders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said to him, Samuel, you're old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. So at first glance, this is a good request, right? Hey, we don't want to be led by corrupt leaders. We don't want your sons to lead us. Please give us a king. But the deal is, that last line is why they're really asking, such as all the other nations have. So the backstory to this is, since the time of Exodus, when God delivered them out of slavery in Egypt, when he redeemed them, he led Israel. He led them. When they followed God, things would go great for them. They would be blessed. They would prosper. Everything would work out. When they didn't, and they turned and served other gods, when they'd go worship other foreign gods, it would go poorly for them. They would be overthrown by enemy nations, but God did not abandon them. He keeps raising up judges like Samson in the Bible, or Othniel, or any of those people, and he would raise them up and put his spirit upon them, and they would overthrow the enemy nation, and he would bring Israel back to himself, and they would follow him for a while, and then they would repeat the cycle. And the entire book of Judges is just this, over and over and over again, till you're like, how many times is this going to happen? Just hundreds of years of this cycle. And so that sets the stage for this. They come and they say, hey, we don't want God to lead us anymore. We just want to have a king like everybody else. We don't want to be this special nation. We don't want to represent God. We just want to have a king. Can we just do that? And this is Samuel's response. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. And they have done as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing it to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. It's really interesting that God looks at this moment of Israel asking for a king, and he equates it to idolatry. Yeah. He's saying, man, you're not designed to be ruled by men. You're designed to be ruled by me. That's your purpose. But over and over again, like the moment he signs that covenant with Israel on Mount Sinai, what do they immediately do? They build a golden calf and start worshiping it. And he's like, you asking for a king is the same thing. You asking for a king, you might as well just be worshiping an idol. And they keep doing this, but he tells Samuel, yeah, listen to him. But first, I want you to give them one more chance. I want you to warn them about what a king's like. And so Samuel gives this huge rant to Israel. He says, you want a king? Let me tell you what kings do. Kings are going to tax you. Kings are going to steal your daughters and marry them. They're going to send your sons to war. They're going to take all the good land for themselves. They're going to be corrupted by power. And look at Israel's response. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. I mean, this is just not great from the get-go. When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. And here's the thing. Sometimes God's harshest judgments against us is just to give us what we want. Say, okay, if that's what you think is good, if that's what you think is worthy, if that's what you want, you can have it. And God gives it to us, even if it destroys us. He said, man, I want to be your king. Follow me, and everything will go like it should. But we don't, and we chase after everything else. And so he gives them a king, and he gives them King Saul. He gives them the exact king that they want. He says, okay, how about this guy? He gives them Saul, who's like a giant. He's a foot taller than all the other Israelites. And he's handsome. And he's a famous warrior. And he seems to be really humble. And the people are pumped. They're like, yes, this is what we're talking about. That's what we want. We want to follow that dude, not you. And so they're like, okay, here we go. And then Saul starts out all right. But just like Samuel says, he starts being corrupted by power. And he starts trying to desperately cling on to that power. And it becomes this big indictment of idolatry, of looking to people to protect you, of looking to men to take care of you. And as he spirals down and down, he eventually just completely disregards God, starts doing stuff that God specifically tells him not to, and just forsakes God. And so God looks at it and goes, okay, this experiment needs to end. So I'm going to appoint my king, a king that I choose. And he tells Samuel, go find this guy named Jesse. I want you to go there and I want you to anoint one of his sons. He's going to be king. And so Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, do you come in peace? And Samuel replied, yes, in peace. And so I just left that in there because it's hilarious. Like, have you ever been a kid in like elementary school and the principal comes in and you're like, oh no. And you like have a panic attack. Like, is it me? Is it me? That's what the elders are doing. They see Samuel and they're like, wait, what? This can't be good. Are you here for peace? And he goes, yeah, I'm just coming to make a sacrifice. And so Samuel's trying to do all this under the radar because he doesn't want Saul to kill him. So he's like, okay, I'm going to sneak in here and anoint this king for God. Then I'm going to get out of here. So he goes into Jesse's house and he sees Jesse's oldest son, Eliab. And Samuel thinks to himself, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. So he sees this tall eldest son and goes, yeah, that's what a king looks like. He's doing the exact same thing that Israel did with Saul. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height. Please stop looking at how tall people are, Samuel. I know. For I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And the Hebrew word for heart there is very similar to ours, but it has a little bit extra connotation. In the Hebrew, their heart is your inner desires, your hidden, secret inner desires, and your will to make them happen. How are you going to go about achieving your desires? And this becomes this theme for David. And so Jesse starts parading all his sons in front of Samuel, all 7 sons. And Samuel's like, nope, 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 all 7 sons. And Samuel's like, okay, I know God told me to come anoint a king here. Do you happen to have any other kids you just forgot about? And Jesse's like, oh yeah, I have another kid. He's out there tending sheep. It's like, this is the biggest moment in this family's life This is like the president came to their house for dinner with them, and they didn't even invite David. They didn't even think about David. David's still out there tending sheep. And so Samuel goes, yeah, bring that guy. Maybe that's the one. And so it is. And so Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And so this is a huge moment for David. I want you to put yourself in his shoes. David's like 11, 12 years old, somewhere in there. And the prophet of the Lord comes to you and says, God has ordained that your purpose in life is to be the next president of the United States. You're going to be the most powerful man in the nation. Everyone will know you. You'll be the most famous person in the nation. How would you handle that? Right? What would you do? Would you start lording it over your brothers? Like, get me a sandwich, peasant. Like, like your mom tells you to do something. You're like, King David has a new rule. I get to play video games all night. Like, how would you treat people? How would you go about achieving this purpose? And so what does David do? We don't know right then, because we get this weird story about Saul being tormented by spirits and spiraling into madness. And God's doing something. And Saul's advisors look at this and go, hey, you know what you need? You need a harp player, Saul. If we just got you a harp player, this would fix everything, which is weird, but apparently it works. One of Saul's servants goes, hey, I've seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He's a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him. I really like that verse, and the Lord is with him at the end. He's like, he can play a harp. He's a fine-looking man. But they sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David. Where's David? He's with the sheep. He didn't change anything. He went right back to doing the lowest job that there was, the most thankless job, the one where his parents didn't even remember he was doing that job when Samuel came. He's right back with the sheep. He's doing what's right in front of him to do. He knows his purpose. He doesn't change anything. And so when Saul needs a harp player, they send for David, and he's with the sheep. Where did he learn how to play the harp? Well, with the sheep. He spent all of his time doing what was in front of him to do, which was his job, tending sheep. And so he's like, you know what would be great? If I learned how to play the harp. Like, why did he learn the harp? Was it so he could sign a record deal and go play? No. He wasn't expecting, he didn't learn the harp to go achieve his goal of playing for Saul. He learned the harp because it was in his heart. He thought it was cool. He's like, man, it'd be great if I learned how to play the harp. And so he sat out there with the sheep, and he learned how to play the harp. He learned a skill when he's doing this grunt job, this thankless job, and God uses that skill to open up a door for him at the palace. He takes this thing he learned, doing what was right in front of him to do, and he gets him in the palace from the wilderness. And so he goes and he plays for Saul, and it helps Saul. But then nothing happens for David. He doesn't, like, you would think, like, oh, this is my moment. Saul's going to, like, die, and then they're going to be like, put that harp player up as king. But nothing happens. David plays for him, helps him, and then he goes right back to the sheep. And whenever Saul has this deal, they call for David, and he goes, plays for him, and he leaves, and he goes back. And it seems like nothing's going to happen, but then something happens. Goliath happens. And so Israel goes to war with the Philistines. The Philistines come out, and they have a giant. He's like 9'9", and he comes out, and everyone is terrified of him. He's yelling at Israel. Y'all know this story. Israel's terrified. No one will fight Goliath. Not Saul. No one in the whole nation of Israel is willing to go fight Goliath. And so we get this story. Now, David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons. And in Saul's time, he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons followed Saul to the war. So they're out there in the camp looking at Goliath. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul, playing the harp, back to tend his father's sheep. Now Jesse said to his son David, take sandwiches to your brother, basically. Like, I need you to be a sandwich boy. And David doesn't get mad and be like, hey, remember, I'm king. Like, I'm not your sandwich boy, Dad. He doesn't do that. He's like, okay. And he takes sandwiches to his brother. And while he's there, he sees Goliath and he hears him and he's like, what's this guy's problem? And he's like, gives the sandwiches and he starts looking around. He's like, everybody's afraid of this guy? Why are y'all afraid of him? Hey, what happens if I kill that dude? And everyone's like, what are you talking about, sandwich boy? You're not killing that guy. Like, you're not doing it. And he's like, no, but what happens if I do? And everyone's like, what are you talking about? And word gets back to King Saul, hey, there's somebody in the camp that's not afraid of Goliath. He's willing to fight Goliath. And so Saul calls him, yeah, bring David to me. And David gets there and Saul's like, oh no, you're like 12 years old and you're a sandwich boy. Goliath is 9'9" and has been killing soldiers his entire life. Like, this is a man of war. And look at David's response to Saul, telling him he can't do it. He goes, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. Like, okay, David. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine, which is a great, cut down to use with your friends, will be like one of them, because he has defied armies of the living God. The Lord, okay, so David spends the whole first time talking about his accomplishments and killing them, the lion and the bear. And then look at the last line. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. So where did David's battles happen? He's tending the sheep. He was just doing what was in front of him to do. His job was to do this lowly job. And he's out there and he's like, okay, my job is to protect these sheep. He's just doing his job as faithful as he can. And then a bear comes and tries to steal one of his sheep. So David goes, what's my job now? To kill that bear. God didn't protect trouble from coming to David. He delivered him in that trouble. When David's doing what he's supposed to do, when that bear shows up, David knows, okay, this is from the Lord and I can handle this. I can handle this. And so he kills the bear and he kills the lion and he takes trophies of them. And learning to trust the Lord, doing what is right in front of you to do, being faithful in what's right, it gets into David. And so when he sees Goliath, he's like, well, God put me here. He sent me here with sandwiches and there's a bear. This must be my job now. And he goes and does it. Saul's like, okay, I believe you. This speech has convinced me. Here, take my armor and my sword. And so he puts his armor and his sword and his helmet on David. And David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he's not used to it. And David goes, I can't go in these because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in hand, he approached the Philistine. And so here's the deal, like, David's in this moment. He's about to go battle. And Saul's like, here, take my armor, take my sword, take all this stuff. David goes, I can't do that. That's not me. God delivered me from the bear and the lion with this sling. That's all he needed. So that's all I need now. And often, like, in life, we start looking at everybody and comparing ourselves to everybody else. We get on social media and we see, like, man, that person's car, that person's house, their job, their deal. And we start trying to become these people. And we start saying, man, if I just had their gifts, if I could sing like them, or if I could play like them, or if I had their wealth, man, then God could use me. Then I would have a purpose in life. Then I would know what's going on. And David's like, no, none of that matters. Like, all I need is what's in my hand. That's all I need. What he's already given me in my hand right now is all I need to fight the battle that I'm in right now. I've already got it. And so he goes out there and he kills Goliath. He kills Goliath with Goliath's own sword. He takes his sword and cuts his head off. And he keeps him as a trophy. And I just think that's cool. That's why I use this statue on my graphic. So you got the head of Goliath down there by his feet. And you look over on the left side by his knee, you've got the head of the lion over there. He's got the scriptures in one hand. He's got his heart in the other hand. And the thing that David did throughout his life is any time God worked a victory in his life, like Goliath, he kept trophies. He kept it. He kept Goliath's head. When he goes back to Saul, he still has Goliath's head. He's like, done. And he keeps it with him for his life. There's a story way later, years later, decades later, where David he is unarmed and he's got to get a sword. And he's like, oh yeah, I have Goliath's sword. And he goes back and gets Goliath's sword because he puts it in storage. And he keeps it and he looks back at these victories that God's wrought in his life. And that's something that most people don't do, right? God can do something huge for you, and 6 months later, you're like, you never do anything for me, God. Like, we just forget. But David didn't, and he just kept it. And so out of this, Saul goes, hey, who's this David guy? And they're like, hey, he plays harp for you, bro. And they're like, oh, well, he should be a soldier. So Saul makes David a soldier. And what does David do? Does what's right in front of him to do. He becomes a great soldier. He just does what's in front of him. And he starts accumulating fame. And people start to love him. And the army starts to love him. And women start to sing songs about him. And you're like, oh, it's all happening for David. David's going to become king. It's going to happen. That's not what happens. Because Saul gets super jealous of David. Gets super jealous. And he starts calling David to come play the harp for him. And he tries to kill him. Starts throwing spears at David. So what does David do? Does David say, okay, listen, man. God's anointed me to take your job. I'm going to kill you. Like, the army loves me more than they love you. The people love me more than they love you. I'm a better warrior. I'm going to kill you. He doesn't, I mean, would you? What would you do? If you're the most famous person, the army loves you, you've already been told by God that you're supposed to be king, do you take matters into your own hands? David does not. Not only that, Saul tries to kill him over and over and over again. And David just keeps showing up to work. Like, just showing up. I'm going to play for you now. Oh, we're throwing spears. Okay, I'll come back tomorrow. And he does this over and over again. And then Saul starts sending him on suicide missions as a soldier. And David's like, okay, I need to kill 100 Philistines. All right, I'll kill 200. And he goes and he does it. And he comes back. And he just is faithful. Whatever's right in front of him to do. Oh, this murderer wants me to come play harp for him? Okay, I'll do it. And he does it. Have you ever had a terrible boss and you're like, I could do your job so much better than you? Man, you just don't get it. You're such a bad boss. I would be so much better in that role. I'm so much more qualified. Man, what do you do in those situations? Do you start complaining all the time to your other employees? Do you start going over their head and talking trash about your boss to their boss? Do you start leading immunity? Do you start applying for other jobs? What did David do? Showed up to work. Showed up to work and did it faithfully. Did it as if it was to the Lord that he was playing harp for, not for Saul. And he just keeps doing it until it becomes impossible for him to do that. It gets to a point where Saul's son, Jonathan, comes to him and goes, hey, you can't come into work tomorrow. They're going to execute you. You got to get out of here. And so David goes, okay. And so the next thing in front of David to do is to run for his life in exile. And he does it. And he doesn't get mad. And he doesn't feel like God's abandoned his purpose for him. He just does what's in front of him to do. God, I'm out here in the wilderness and I've got some men with me. What should I do? And God's like, well, Philistines are about to attack this city. You should go protect it. He goes, okay. So he goes and he does it. And he protects that city. And his fame starts to grow. And Saul sends the whole army of Israel after David. And what about your purpose is dependent on your circumstance? You know, like when we look at our lives, we think we have this purpose. And when things are not going that way, it's so easy to make it happen on your own. To start working and striving. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to be something. I'm going to make God's purpose happen in my life. And David just doesn't. He doesn't. He never puts his hand to make it happen. He has this deep trust and knowledge in God that, man, God said he wants me to be king. He's anointed me to be king. If he wants to do that, like he says, he's going to have to do it himself. I'm just going to be faithful with what's in front of me. And when God provides that opportunity, and I know it's God, then I'll do it. But until then, I will never let there be this question of, did I make this happen for myself or was it God? He just trusts in this. And we get that in this scene. Saul sends the whole nation, or the whole armies of Israel, against David. And David's just hiding in exile. He hasn't done anything wrong. All he's ever done is what Saul's asked him to do. And he's hiding in these caves. And the nations of Israel is outside looking to kill him, Saul's army. And they're hiding in this cave. And Saul doesn't know he's in there. And Saul, by himself, for some reason, is like, man, I need to go to the bathroom. And he gets alone and he goes into the cave to use the bathroom where David and his whole army is. Like, if that's not the moment to kill Saul, when is? And look, David's men start hyping him up. They're in the back of the cave and he goes, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David creeps up unnoticed to Saul and he takes his knife and he cuts a corner of Saul's tunic off. He just cuts it off. He could have killed Saul. And he's like, nope, I'm not going to kill him. But then David immediately feels bad about even doing that. Look at this. Afterwards, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master. The guy that's trying to kill him, the guy that God has already promised David is going to replace. David has a deep trust and understanding that what God wants, he'll make happen. And David does not have to take matters into his own hand. All he has to do is be faithful with what's in front of him. And he says, for he is the anointed of the Lord, talking about Saul. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. And Saul had no idea all this happened. And so, what does this tell us? What is this deep thing I'm talking about? And it's, how do you know when something is God's will and God's purpose in your life? And how is it something that you strove for and made happen? And that's the simple answer to me is, did I make it happen? Did I try for this? Was I pushing to be king? And David never did. David never pushed to be king. He never did one thing to try to take what God had promised him. All David did was faithful in what was right in front of him. And this is what he says in Psalms. I call to God, Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. Who fulfills his purpose? God. God didn't do it. David didn't do it. He just trusted. All I have to do, all God expects of me, is to be faithful with what's right in front of me right now to do. And we have such a hard time with this, man. We're always looking for the next big thing. We're always looking for the next step, the next deal, and we try to cut all these corners, and we try to do all this, and we try to make things happen for us, and then it doesn't work out. We're like, God, where were you, man? You're supposed to just bless whatever I want. I just do what I want, and then you come and bless it. And God's like, that's not how this works. That's not how this works. And David just has this deep understanding that, okay, I know Saul's trying to kill me, but he's not my problem to deal with. He's not my problem. When God's ready for Saul to not be king anymore, God will make that happen. And God does. David never kills Saul. Saul dies in a battle. And even then, David does not take the throne. His men are like, go, now's the time. Saul's dead. Take Jerusalem. Take it. And David's like, absolutely not. When God's ready for me to be king, I'll be king. And then all the elders of Israel come to David and say, hey, it's time. We want you to rule. And he goes, okay. And then he goes. And so what does this mean? How is this actually applicable? Let's end with this. I'll tell you a story about me, and I never do this, but I've really tried to deeply internalize this message for a long time in my life. And so let me tell you how I ended up here preaching to you. And we'll just go back to my most recent stuff. I was a janitor at a church, and I had always felt strongly that I would be in the ministry some way, but I didn't know how. Didn't know what it would be. Could it be as a musician? I don't know. I can do that a little bit. Could be anything. I didn't know. I just knew I loved the Lord and I wanted to love him. That's it. And I felt the calling. So I'm just cleaning toilets, for Jesus in my mind. It sounds trite, but I really was. I'm like, I'm serving as unto you. God, everything that I do, I'm just going to do it for you. And I have frustrating days where I'm like, are you kidding me, people? This is a church. Why do you live like this? And, I had these frustrating days, but I stuck with it and I did it for years. And then one day a person comes up to me and goes, hey, we would love to start a coffee shop in this church. And I know you have a background in that. Can you do that? And I said, yeah, okay, and I'll do it. So I did that for years. I ran a coffee shop. And then one day, a person comes to me and says, hey, my brother has a business. Will you go work for him? He needs your help. I said, okay. And I went to work in the beer industry. And I worked there for 8 years. And then towards the end of it, I hated it. And I was so tired of it. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like who I'm becoming. I don't like what I'm doing. But I didn't apply for any other jobs. I just prayed. I said, God, man, listen, I'm tired of this. And once I've learned whatever it is you want me to learn in this, God, I just ask that you'll provide something else. Just provide the next thing. Because I'm not going to make it happen on my own because I know I'll make a bad choice. I know I can't trust myself to do what's in my own best interest. And so I did. And 2 years went by of me being ready for something else. And I was just trusting God, whenever it's time, you'll provide what the next thing is for me. And then one day Daryl Roach goes, Tanner, would you be our youth pastor? And I said, yes. And Lindsay was like, what? Like, what? Why would you? I mean, that should have been a big, hard decision, right? I'm taking a big pay cut. I'm going from running all these businesses to teaching 8 youth kids. Taking a big pay. I'm opting out of Social Security. I'm like, why would you say yes to that? Lindsay's like, why did you say yes so fast? We didn't even. And I was like, because it's the next thing. This is the next thing. Never considered myself a preacher. Never considered myself a pastor. But I'm like, I prayed for it. And I've been waiting for it. And then God just put it in front of me. And there's peace. There's peace. And that's the thing. If you try to make it happen on your own, there's never peace. It's all stress all the time. Did I make the right choice? Did I not make the right choice? Did I miss my purpose back there when I married that person? Did I miss my purpose when I took this job? And it's just stress. But when you just trust God and say, hey, I'm going to be faithful with what I'm right in front of me to do. And I'm going to trust you to provide the next thing for me. Yeah. That when I learn the skills I need to learn in this place, like David with killing the bear, killing the lion, if he didn't do that, if he just let the bear take it, then he's never ready for Goliath. Yeah. You learn the skills you need for the next place where you are now. And if you refuse to learn them because you don't like where you're at and you think you're more important than them, then there's never a next place. God leaves you there until you learn what you need for what he has for you. Yeah. Yeah. This is a tough deal. We don't like this though. Like we just don't. And so here's the deal. Maybe we'll just end with this. If the ministry team will come up. Maybe you're in a place right now, you're in a season in your life where you look at your life and go, man, I'm just a sandwich boy. No, I mean, dude, that's fine. You know, you look at it and you go, man, all my friends are doing big things. Man, all these people, they're way more important than me. What am I doing wrong? And the answer might not be you're doing anything wrong. The answer might just be in how you're looking at your circumstances. And you're judging your purpose based off your current circumstance. How do you find your purpose? It's where you are right now, today. It's in the marriage you're in right now, today. It's in the job you work right now, today. And when you approach those things as, I'm going to be a faithful, good steward of what God's put into my hands right now. And I'm going to learn to love and to use the thing that God's put in my hands right now. And you learn that, you will be shocked at how fast your circumstances change. And all of a sudden you're using these skills that you learned in that deal in your next place. And you start the process all over. And that's what he asks of us. That's it. Just be faithful with what's in your hands to do. And that should just let all that stress go off of you. All of that decision fatigue, all of the striving. It should be, oh man, this is really simple. This is really simple. And so maybe you're just in this place and you feel like you missed it. You feel like you missed your purpose. I just want to encourage you, you have not. You have not. And so If you need prayer today for anything, if you're stressed out, if it's anxiety, if it's regrets, if it's uncertainty about your future or what God has for you, I just want to encourage you to come get prayer for any need that you have, because that's what we're here for. That's what the church does. We join together in a community. We pray for one another. We lift each other up. We help each other. And God loves that, and he moves on that, and he does what he loves to do, which is heal your heart and transform your heart into the character of someone like David, who regardless of your circumstances can say, God, I trust that you will fulfill your purpose in my life. So Father God, we come before you and we say that you are worthy of all of the glory, all of the honor, and all of the power, God. Come do what you love to do. Heal our hearts. God, give us wisdom to seek you and to follow you well, to be faithful in what's in our hands to do. Amen. Thank you.